On April 2nd, 2025, US President Donald Trump delivered a major trade blow to India, imposing a steep 27% reciprocal tariff. All Indian goods entering the US from April 9 will attract a minimum 27% levy. This announcement is expected to impact Indian economy and corporate India. Given the importance of this development, reciprocal tariffs by Donald Trump on India is a hot GD topic for MBA admissions and other admission process. Read this article to understand what, why, how, and expected impact on India. Trump reciprocal tariffs policy. Latest developments. On April 2nd, 2025, the US has levied a 26% tariff on Indian goods as part of new Trump reciprocal tariff chart. Trump's new policy imposes a minimum 10% baseline tariff on all imports, with steep penalties for countries he says have unfair trade barriers. China has been levied 34% reciprocal tariff, while Vietnam has been levied 46%. Check detailed Trump reciprocal tariffs chart breakdown below. Trump reciprocal tariffs chart released on April 3rd, 2025.
Starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations.
How could Trump tariffs impact the Indian stock market? Trump's tariffs could trigger a negative impact on Indian economy and trade. Sectors like IT and automobiles may face some pressure. India's trade surplus with the US is not significant. According to India Brand Equity Foundation, IBEF, in FY24, India had a trade surplus of $36.8 billion with the US. Indian exports to the US stood at $77.5 billion, while American exports to India stood at $47 billion in FY24. So experts see limited impact of Trump tariff on Indian business and economy. What is Trump reciprocal tariffs? Reciprocal tariff refers to a trade policy where two or more countries impose similar tariffs on each other's goods and services. If one country lowers or removes tariffs on imports from another country, the other country reciprocates by doing the same. For example, if country A reduces tariffs on steel imports from country B may respond by lowering tariffs on agricultural products from country A. This approach is based on the principle of mutual benefit, aiming to promote balanced trade relations and reduce trade barriers between nations. Why does President Trump want to impose reciprocal tariffs? Trump believes that the US is being treated unfairly in global trade. He argues that many countries impose higher tariffs on US goods than the US does on theirs, creating an imbalance in trade. President Trump is forcing major powers like China, Canada, and the European Union to lower their duties, as he believes reciprocal tariffs will boost his America First economic policy by narrowing the country's trade deficit while improving the competitiveness of US manufacturers. According to data from Global Trade Alert, an organization which assesses commerce policies, India levies tariffs that are typically between 5 and 20% higher than the US on 87% of imported goods. Trump has said he wants to match the levy on US imports that other countries apply to US products. But economists have pointed out that the US actually benefits from having large trade imbalances with the rest of the world, as the dollar, the global reserve currency, is used in most trade, which offers major tailwinds to the US economy. Which countries have the highest trade deficit with the US in 2024? China had the largest deficit in goods traded. Mexico's deficit follows at $172 billion, and the US has a trade deficit of $63 billion with Canada. Together, the three countries make up 41% of total US imports. India is also one of the top 10 countries on trade deficit with the US. How will the Trump reciprocal tariffs plan work? According to a White House memo, the US federal authorities have been given about 6 months to identify countries that impose higher tariffs than the US and recommend tariffs on a country-specific basis. However, the tariffs could take effect much before that deadline. The countries with the highest trade deficits are to be targeted first, including close US allies. Once approved, the reciprocal tariffs could be executed by the US government over other countries. What is the likely impact of Trump reciprocal tariffs on global economy? Economists have cautioned that the tariffs previously introduced by Trump could increase consumer prices for imported goods in the US, fueling inflation. After a period of decades-high inflation following the COVID-19 pandemic, US inflation had significantly declined. However, in January, the consumer price index rose to 3%, marking the highest rate in 6 months. S&P Global Ratings has projected that tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico could cause a one-time increase of up to 12.7% in US consumer prices if the levies are fully implemented. However, the exact impact of reciprocal tariffs on US inflation remains uncertain until the measures are formally announced. While some US domestic producers and retailers may benefit from Trump's tariff policy, they could also face higher costs for imported raw materials and potential supply chain disruptions. US exporters may suffer as well due to retaliatory tariffs from trading partners. Governments such as the EU and China have already announced countermeasures, and others are likely to follow. What is the likely impact of Trump reciprocal tariffs on India? US President Donald Trump criticized the high tariffs charged by India, terming them as very unfair, and announced reciprocal tariffs from April 2nd.
Nations charge us tremendously higher tariffs than we charge them. It's very unfair. We have been ripped off for decades by nearly every country on earth, and we will not let that happen any longer.
President Trump made these remarks in an address to the joint session of the Congress on March 4, 2025. President Trump has criticized the high tariffs charged by India and other countries, terming them as very unfair, and announced reciprocal tariffs from April 10th on nations that impose levies on American goods. Mr. Trump has made it clear to Prime Minister Modi, who visited the US recently, that India will not be spared from reciprocal tariffs. India imposes a 30 to 40 to 60 and even 70% tariff on so many of the goods, and in some cases far more than that. As an example, a 70% tariff on US cars going into India, which makes it pretty much impossible to sell those cars. Per US estimates, the US total goods trade with India was an estimated $129.2 billion in 2024. The US goods exports to India in 2024 were $41.8 billion, up 3.4%, $1.4 billion from 2023. US goods imports from India totaled $87.4 billion in 2024, up 4.5%, $3.7 billion from 2023. The US goods trade deficit with India was $45.7 billion in 2024, a 5.4% increase, $2.4 billion over 2023. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has visited Washington for trade talks with his US counterpart. How will countries try to avoid these retaliatory tariffs? Trump's use of tariffs has heightened concerns about a global trade war and created significant uncertainty across various industries and countries. The announcement of reciprocal tariffs is expected to trigger a new round of negotiations that could lead to reduced levies on US exports. India has already lowered tariffs on several goods in response to Trump's tariff threats. Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri stated after a recent meeting between Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Washington that a deal to resolve trade issues could be reached within the next 7 months.